Welcome, system thinkers. You're watching The Question. I'm your host, Ben Callahan, and each week I invite a new co-host to join us and help facilitate a deep dive into design systems. This episode of The Question is sponsored by zeroheight and Sparkbox, and we're so glad you're here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join me for this episode's deep dive. My name is Ben Callahan. I'm a design system researcher, writer, speaker, coach, and consultant. But most of all, I'm a curious guy. And that's precisely what led me to create The Question. Every week, a new co-host and I will ask you a few questions about a very specific design system-related topic. You'll have 48 hours to answer, and everyone who does is invited to join the deep dive. Each week is kind of like a mini research project on a very niche design system topic. This only works if we all stay in learning mode. Before I introduce my co-host for this week, I just want to say a big thank you to zeroheight and Sparkbox for sponsoring this episode. zeroheight is the end-to-end design system management platform, the place your team can document, deliver, measure, and evolve your design system. Book a demo or learn more at zeroheight.com. Sparkbox partners with complex organizations to create user-driven digital experiences, including world-class design systems. Learn more at sparkbox.com/thequestion. This week, I'm joined by my friend and co-host Jesse Gardner to talk about multi-platform design systems. Jesse is the Director of User Research at the New York State Office of Information Technology Services. He's also a philosopher, gamer, hiker, photographer, and of course, a systems thinker. Let's get started. Let's jump in. So the question this week came about, Jesse and I were chatting a little bit about the complexity that sometimes is involved where we go up to do all this work to sort of conceptually define a component or a piece or a part of our interfaces. And then the challenge, of course, is that we have sometimes multiple brands, multiple products, multiple platforms, multiple channels, right? Like the products that we're supporting with our systems exist across all kinds of stuff. And that the technology stacks are different, the delivery, pipelines are different. And so that creates this sort of very complex web of stuff that we're trying to support. And so that kind of got us thinking, like, what is a platform? Like, we use that word a lot. We kind of landed on this definition that a platform supported by your design system is one for which you offer unique assets that enable the building of products constructed for or with that platform. So the example we put in here, if your system offers assets that are used by teams of React devs to build products, you're supporting React as a platform. That's one tiny example, right? There's lots of these. And then we asked two questions. The first quantitative was, how many platforms does your design system support? And the second was, tell us which ones and how are you overcoming the challenges of doing so, right? Because it's not simple to do that. And so when we took a look at the actual data, we sent that out via email to 196 folks. We got 31 people to respond, and you can click this link here to go actually look at the raw data if that's of interest to you. So feel free to do that. And we've kind of summarized things. This little graph shows how people answered that first question. So how many platforms do you support? So I'm not sure why I put 0 as an answer, but probably didn't need to do that. But what we noticed was like 1, 2, or 3. Is kind of like the most common. And so I think it was interesting to see 75% of folks were kind of fell in that range, and then we kind of jumped up to like 5 or more. And some of the folks who are supporting 5 or more are supporting a lot. Like 10, 12 platforms. So pretty wild to see that there are systems out there that are scaling in that way. I also took a look at the data a little bit more and into some of the qualitative answers that you all gave, and just tried to like categorize things a bit to see. And of course, web really kind of was the primary thing, but a lot of folks are supporting native as well, and a lot of times it was both. And when I say native in this, I lumped in like any sort of any mobile native technologies, or also desktop tech like Mac OS and things like this. We had one member, I don't know if they're on or not, supporting OTT, so over the top, like desktop or TV streaming type stuff, which was super cool to see. A lot of like little CRM stuff, Salesforce, and some CMS work, and quite a few more folks than I expected listed email too. And that's not something that I had even thought of to mention in the question. So that was really cool. I broke out some of these things in terms of the number of respondents who offered these or who listed these things. So you can kind of see iOS, React kind of really taken a big majority of things. I expected React and Angular to be a little closer, but it's like twice as many people are supporting React as Angular. So, and we did notice there was quite a few folks on supporting web components and maybe even looking to support some of those JavaScript frameworks through web components. Jesse, tell me, what did you see when you looked at the data?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. There were a couple of things that stood out to me. Someone had said shipping only CSS, and I thought that was interesting because I think part of what prompted this question is, when we think about design systems really are about the connections. And so part of what I got thinking about is you can build a very robust one part of the system, like a node in that system. So you could, for example, you could have a very robust visual prototyping library in Figma, but if it's not connected to the software in any way, then sometimes that can, it's not that it isn't useful, but you lose the sort of system aspect of it. And so this idea of the connection through to just CSS, there's something there, even though it's a small thread. So that was interesting to read that. Very pragmatic, I guess, is to put it that way.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah.
I also noticed that people struggled to support legacy systems. I don't know if that's a common theme among the people that are here today, but I definitely have experienced that, where it's like, yeah, that's great for the new things we're building, but what about for the existing, platforms that are around?
I picked up on that as well. And what's funny is like everything becomes legacy at some point, right? So it's like the stuff that's new today is going to be legacy in a year or two, right? And so there's this constant, I think this is one of the challenges for us as design system folks, is like the tech is changing every day. And it's like, especially in many of our calls, I've heard folks say things like, yeah, my boss thought we would build it once and it would be done. The system would just be done. But it's like any other product in that it never really is complete, especially because the things we're supporting are constantly changing. So I think that creates this additional level of complexity in the work. So I love it that I'm seeing some folks add some questions or other thoughts over on the right. Just a couple little highlights from actual answers. This answer here, well, there were quite a few. The way the question was asked is like, how are you overcoming the challenges? And a lot of folks responded with something along the lines of this first one, which is, we're not like, we're just trying to survive, basically, was a lot of the sentiment. So I hear you all. I know that feeling. I just thought that was kind of funny that was a very common, actually, I should have counted those up, but a lot of people said, I'm not sure, here's what we're trying. I don't feel like it's working that great, but this is what we're working on. There was one person shared this sentiment, which I think it comes into another area that I'm super curious about, but they said what makes the challenges essentially manageable is having a pretty large dedicated engineering team, right? So you can kind of solve this problem of the complexity of all these different things to support by having specialists that are experts in each of those areas, right? Each platform has a team of experts around it. Well, yeah, then of course you can support them well. But I don't think that's a common scenario, right? So like when we asked a question a couple weeks back about the size of teams, most people are like pretty small teams. So they don't have dedicated like massive engineering teams on each of these platforms that are working on the system. So that's an interesting solution. I don't know that it scales, right, to like every organization who wants this. So I'm just curious, folks have experience with this? So like, are any of you working on really large teams where you have this kind of support, or are you trying to solve this in a different way? And just feel free to unmute and jump in if you have a thought to share there. Somebody's got to be.
Hang on here. I'm not sure if I wrote this. I can't remember, but I can say that it's definitely something that works in our experience. Engineering has been a huge believer in the design system, and that they are throwing resources at it because they understand the impact it has, and leadership has really bought into it, and that has really helped supporting React different versions of Angular quite well. I wouldn't say easy, but easier to do, because we have how many I can't even count how many developers we have across web, the different web platforms, iOS and Android, and it really does make a difference in supporting all the different requests of unstandardized teams choosing whatever platform they want, and having a tokens package that can be adopted by whatever you're using in theory. It really has helped. But yeah, it's not often you say throw money at the solution and it fixes it. It's one of these cases that actually does help a lot, but it's easier said than done, obviously.
Yeah. Daniel, can you expand a little bit on the token strategy that you all have? Like, what are you using there? How's that working for you?
I don't know the specific details of what we. I know Style Dictionary is a key component of this, but thinking about the question itself that came to mind is, what does support mean? Right, support is a very generic term, and it means very many different things. And so, we actually, if you have a good token system that can be adopted, you actually can support any platform, right? As long as it can consume variables, which basically any program language can do, and you can get it in there. You can support any platform that you want. It's just what level of support of each platform you want to do is going to differ. Dedicated support for Angular is, building HTML components that can be consumed and have two-way binding, blah, 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 blah. But, if you want to support email, right, maybe CSS tokens is enough, and that is supporting it.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear how other folks think about that, right? So if we say, I want to support iOS and I want to support Android as two separate platforms, right? Is it enough in your mind to say, I'm going to pass them, I'm going to do some thinking about some codified design decisions in the form of tokens. I'm going to transform those into the technologies needed for those platforms and offer those to those teams to use? Is that enough? Or do we need to go to the level of building actual components for each of those teams? What are your thoughts on that?
No, it's a crazy thing, because let's say, for instance, let's talk about material design just for a second. It's just a wonderful platform framework. Its specialty is that you can do dark mode and light mode, right? So when we talk about what is the level of support for tokens, is that you would pretty much need to have a framework, if you want a full support, to be able to handle that dark mode and light mode. That really is the difficulty. Giving over tokens is not a big deal. I could transform to iOS or Android or CSS, SAS. Name your platform. It's quite easy, especially with Style Dictionary, which I program. So that has really kind of been my challenge, and I think we've been successful. But the tokens themselves are pretty much non-problematic. I think it's the depth and the level of support for the entire experience throughout modes.
So a vote from Kevin there that we need to do more than just the tokens. Caroline, what's on your mind?
Yeah, so we currently support all of our platforms, email, native, mobile, and web through tokens. Right now, it's a super basic set of colors. We do support light and dark themes on all of the platforms, and we're pretty good and consistent there. But we're running into a problem now where we're realizing that we've built these components in isolation per platform, and we've sort of guided our design principles towards that platform. And so we have a very disparate design aesthetic between our web and our native. And we're realizing we've created some of this brain inconsistency, even though our colors match, our colors are great, our typography is great, that all matches. But when it comes down to more component specific design, we're realizing we actually need to go to that threshold of component level tokenization in order to create that consistency across the platforms. We'll never be able to do like actual like shared components because of the inconsistencies in tech. But I think the tokenization, it's like there are definitely levels. You got your foundations, your semantics, and then your kind of your component specific stuff. And we sort of dropped off at that top level and really realizing we need to do more of that in order to create that consistency.
Can you give like an example of like a brand inconsistency that you're seeing that you want to fix?
The big thing that is across platform is actually rounded corners. Like we've sort of made it a very specific decision in our product that we are sharp edges everywhere. Like we don't have rounded corners for anything. Most recently, we had a brand specific update where on our marketing site, we're using a little bit more softer shades in these rounded corners and being a little bit more approachable in that way. And that's sort of the mindset that the mobile team took. And so all of our buttons are rounded corners versus in product, it's all sharp corners. And so it's like those like small inconsistencies or where like it's fine if the user's pretty isolated to one platform or another. And that's typically how our users are. They're either mobile or they're on the web. But if you're going back and forth between the multiple platforms, then you see that inconsistency. And I worry that because of that, you lose a little bit of that customer trust and that customer recognition of your brand.
It seems like, something like that feels almost inconsequential in the context of some of the other big challenges we're facing. But it's like that stuff adds up over time, and if you have too much of that working its way into your interfaces, it can definitely sort of deteriorate the trust, Jesse, do you have a thought there?
I was just going to add the accretion, how that stuff can build up. And I'm curious, I was going to ask the question, like, how did those inconsistencies creep in? Was it like a dev team that just said, you know what, we'll do this? And I don't mean it from the perspective of like blame casting. I'm just really curious about that process, how that stuff builds up, because the larger, like in a startup, for instance, you can imagine someone locking that down more, but in a larger organization, there's this sometimes this trade-off that happens where you say, we're going to have a lighter touch just because our team is so small. So it's okay, but we're going to have to like choose our battles. And so I'm just curious, like what that experience looks like across different sizes of organizations and different, numbers of platforms that you support. So for example, if you only support one, then you can probably, police that a little bit more than if you say you support like 9 different platforms where you say, hey, we're going to give you a set. You should use those in these cases, but I'm sure you have things that you need to override, certain, maybe you have your own secondary library that you're bringing to that particular platform.
Jump in, Eric.
Yeah. It just kind of adding a sort of an anecdotal experience in a previous job. We had the exact same thing on the web. Our product style guide was everything was sharp corners, like nothing had a radius. But the products that I worked on all had, the web component was sort of the back office piece, and we had native applications, and we had specific iOS developers and Android developers, and the designers on those apps actually made the conscious decision to break from the style system. And the apps were done as much strictly the iOS design system and material design system. And their thought there was, we didn't want the styling, the branding to get in the way because these apps were fairly data intensive and used in the field. And their approach was, if someone's got an iPhone, they are very familiar with all of the actions, the swipes, and everything that's already built into that. So why make them learn a new system just so that we can impose our style? And as a designer, it took me a while to kind of get my head around that, because it's like, well, but we've put all this effort into the branding and the design system over here, and why can't you just use that? But after a while, and actually going on site and doing research with people who are using the apps in the field is like, oh, okay, I get it. This is when making a conscious decision not to follow the system, and using somebody else's system almost 99% out of the box actually made sense.
So the justification there was our users are used to using iOS, and so we want to sort of align with the default iOS look and feel and behavior.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. I mean, certainly those native applications have a look and feel, whereas the look and feel of the web, if you don't style it, is not something most folks use, right? So,
right.
Daniel, what's up?
Yeah, just adding on, this is a huge topic that I had a lot, and I'm Eric, to the people you describe. I'm on that side of the fence too. Coming from an accessibility angle, it's very hard if you do a cost benefit analysis of do you keep the iOS and Android stuff or try and make your own. It's a very hard sell to say let's ignore the thousands of hours and research and development that iOS and Android are put into their components and make your own, right? For what benefit? So it looks more like our system. There's very little benefit in terms of the manpower, I shouldn't say manpower, the resources it takes to do that. The accessibility features that you lose by having to create your own and then having to try and rebuild them from scratch. Like typography is a great example. If you want to change the font of an iOS app, you can do that, but the components like iOS's alerts, the font doesn't change in that by default. So you then have an iOS app that is using your brand's fonts in some places, but not others, because Apple doesn't support that. And so you then have to rebuild the alert from scratch that iOS provides. And so Spotify is a great example, I think, who have done a good job of supporting all their platforms. It looks like Spotify, and yet still feels like an iOS app in Spotify. But the amount of resources it must have taken to get there, I can't even imagine. It's so far out of reach for pretty much any other company, unless you're on version 4 of your design system. That's not where most of us are. And so, I don't, most of the designers that I worked with and teams I worked with, it's hard to get there. Most design systems are led by the website. I mean, look at our results today. It's the web that kind of drive how it looks, and it's just a natural thing that's happened based on developments of business and experiences. And so if you end up with trying to go with that approach straight away, you end up with a very web-like iOS app or a very web-like Android app. And that has considerable consequences and is not beneficial. So I think we can get there. It just takes time.
Yeah, Spotify is an interesting example too, because I remember I don't know if you all remember, Rdio used to be this really cool, really well-designed music player that I was kind of into. Spotify kind of came out and was terrible in terms of design at the time. I am dating myself, sorry. But I remember, man, I resisted Spotify for so long because I felt the design was awful, and it took them a decade almost, I think, to sort of get it to a point where I was like, all right, fine, it's good enough, I can use it now, So there's that side too, right? Which is and that might be just a niche thing for somebody who cares about the look and feel of something, but. Hey everybody, there's still a lot of great content left in this episode, but let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors.
How much time are you spending wrangling all the aspects of your design system? Trying to create a unified experience with your UI libraries, your code resources, your design tokens? You need a platform that makes managing a design system easier, not a chore. So zeroheight is the design system management platform that centralizes everything, including your documentation. And this year, we've rolled out some game-changing features that make zeroheight even more powerful. First up, we have the adoption tab, which gives you real-time insights into how your design system is actually being used. So you can hook it up directly to your code repos and NPM packages, and it will not only make sure that everyone is using your latest packages, but it'll also give you insights into component usage as well. Finally, you can prove real design system ROI. And then there's our brand new API as well. In a few minutes, you can create your own Figma plugin or API chatbot to bring your documentation to the places that your team is actually searching for it. If you're looking to make design system management seamless and efficient, what are you waiting for? Try zeroheight for free today by heading to zeroheight.com and use the offer code QUESTION to get a free 90-day trial. That's zeroheight.com and the offer code is QUESTION. Enjoy the show.
For the last 16 years, Ben and I have both been business partners and friends in our company Sparkbox, which is always aimed to build a better web. In the beginning, That was two software engineers coming together believing there was a better way to do things. What Sparkbox evolved into is a complete team that includes user experience, design, engineering, and plenty of consulting and strategy. About 10 years ago, we dove headfirst into design systems, helping some of the world's largest companies and universities and even tons of small businesses to help realize the efficiency and promise of what design systems can bring. I continue to be in awe of what Ben learns and shares in this community. If you need strategic or tactical help with your design system, swing by sparkbox.com and reach out. We'd love to partner with you and your team. Have a great day. Enjoy the show.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that I feel like we're conflating a little bit of two things, which is native interactions versus actual design of the application. Like, you can still make a native application feel like the iOS or like an Android with the gesturing and all of that, but still make it look like your branding, like your application. We did a quick study where we literally just screen captured between iOS and Android some of the major apps like Spotify, Uber, Airbnb, a lot of these applications, and it was just like it was the same across, but no one who was like specifically an Android user or specifically an iOS user felt like they were being inundated with gestures that they didn't understand or a complexity of the actual UI interaction. So I do think like you can still design an app feeling native, but not using the native UI kit.
I would add to that too, Carolyn. I think that's one of the reasons why I think in those cases, the token focused strategy is helpful, because what that does is you're delivering essentially a library of design decisions to those engineering teams, and it's a more productive conversation around which of these things makes sense for us to use. Is it going to be the animation easing? Is it going to be specifically, but we can still keep San Francisco as the font? You know what I mean? Like it's a little bit more selective. However, there's something else that you said that was interesting to me, is this idea of, and this is one of the things that we run into a little bit when we think about UX of applications, because sometimes we can come in and try to do assessments of the UX of an application for, we've got hundreds of applications across New York State. And, we can evaluate user interactions on a particular page, but sometimes we lose out on what does the whole journey look like from start to finish? And that's a little harder, I think, to capture in a kind of a traditional design system. It's harder to capture that because you're really, in some ways, and I would love to hear if I'm off here, but I feel like a design system really is a library of kind of UI decisions, almost more so than the kind of full customer journey. And so I think it's hard to capture those broader journeys in something like a design system. So maybe that's the limit of what a design system is actually able to do.
Yeah, Jesse, you started off by saying the important thing was the connections between the components. But I also kind of hear you maybe hedging that a little and saying like, how, and maybe that's the challenge of systems, right? Is like actually getting at the connections, because I think it's actually not that hard to design. I mean, there's challenges, right? But the real challenges are not designing a bunch of components, right? The challenges are getting the flows right for the actual user, And so this is one of the reasons why we had a whole conversation about outside in versus inside out. Like for me, I don't think you can start foundationally and just build up, because you have to have the flow. You have to have the overarching experience. You can refactor that into pieces and parts that can be reused. But I feel like you have to lean on that connection piece. Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, I had said something about the CSS being interesting because it was a connection point, but in some ways it's a thin thread. Yeah. And I guess what I meant by that is, for example, if you have a set of components, This is an interesting challenge. I feel like the more platforms you support, because again, one of the unique challenges that we're facing, I think, in New York State is that we've got, we've got a ton of different types of, you're applying for a barber's license or applying for, unemployment insurance, like very different types of services and interactions. And so, not to mention the various, Cold Fusion, Drupal, different types of software platforms that we're on. So I think one of the challenges that we're facing is if you were to try to design a set of components inside of Figma or something, you would almost need to create those components for each one of those platforms. And it's hard to scale that, especially with the wide array. So that's why the idea of having that set of tokens provides connectivity from design to code. But at the same time, it's not like this component in visual is an exact representation of what you would have in your platform. So I think part of what I'm thinking about is like, there's connectivity there, but it's not necessarily like this full bandwidth connectivity. It's really just a matter of like a small set of design decisions. But again, that doesn't get to the point that doesn't solve the flow thing. And so if you're trying to communicate brand through some sort of an onboarding process or something like that, like how would you capture that in a design system? Or does that even make sense to try to do that? Is that almost too much?
And just gets it like the sort of like expanding platform support problem. It's like one of the solutions we saw was like lots of people, right? Like experts in specific platforms. But there's a lot of folks who are using web components and, wrapping those in something that a JavaScript framework can then use, so that they don't have to necessarily have on the systems team, React, Angular, Vue devs or whatever, right? They can kind of work in design, convert those into code those as web components using a tool like the one that I see mentioned the most is Stencil, converting those into something that can then be consumed by these other development teams. So that's more of like an automation as opposed to throwing lots of people at the problem, right? So I think that's another approach, is like, how much of this can we automate?
I was just thinking like, this conversation between like user flows and journeys versus like component libraries and how do they support each other. I think once you get through the basics of your component library, like your typography, your colors, all of that, I do think that user journeys should feed into your component library and inform it, because ultimately you're building something to solve a problem. So I think that's where we're getting at is like, if you're in an enterprise business, so I've been at both small and large, if you're in an enterprise business and you have a common component across multiple teams, across multiple user journeys that's being developed over and over again, like that's an easy win. It's kind of like, but I don't think you're going to be building the full user flow into your component library, right? Like you're going to be picking and choosing which pieces, which elements make the most sense to have repeated over and over again on your website. So I think in a smaller company, that's actually easier in my opinion, because everything is repeated across the site because you're trying to get things out quickly and move very fast. Where in a larger company, you've got a lot more complexity. You've got a lot more like niche use cases. I can't tell you how many times I've made someone angry by removing functionality that this one person uses just so everyone else can benefit from this component. So yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So I think I can blend both what Jesse and what Chrissy just said. The kind of thing of like, there's high and low as sort of like a concept of like the bandwidth. I was thinking of it a little more along the lines of it's auto versus manual updates. And I guess the question for you is like whether or not, you need like just set it and forget it. So you might have, say, logos. Those are high bandwidth. So someone wants to drop an asset, suddenly it appears in all the platforms. But then maybe corner races are actually a thing because some, like buttons, they need to like line up in certain ways. You just don't want to have that automatic. And so you need that like a designer in the loop making a conscious decision of like, I think we want to like on this one platform, just like, no. It could be even down to like a feature. Like maybe the onboarding flow is very, very specific and you have a very curated thing and it lines up with the training video. It's like, that's going to be a low bandwidth, not automatic update. So I wonder if there's some of that in there.
I love that spectrum.
I do too. It's funny when you said low and high, my mind went to low fidelity, high fidelity, because that's a conversation that we have a lot with wireframing, et cetera, and some of that. But I think what you're talking about here is low connectivity, high connectivity, or I don't know. I'm curious if there's like a better way of framing that, because like a better word for that, because it really, I think it is about like how much you're relying on the upstream decisions in your product versus being selective about what you decide on. I think I'm articulating that right.
I came from, so I was designing for a client. I had internally for my client 80,000 users using this application. And then externally, probably 3 times that for all of their, businesses. And I thought they did something clever because at a certain point, design systems kind of break at a certain size. I don't know if anyone else has found this to be true. Definitely interested in hearing what you think. And what they kind of did was they created multiple design systems depending on the application. Because, this company had multiple applications, multiple users, multiple use cases. Sometimes they were, their user was another business. Sometimes their user was direct, what we think of the traditional user customer. And then sometimes their user was internal. And they sort of broke out the company in little like user business cases and their design system as well. And I actually thought that worked really well, especially if we come back to like user flows, because then we were able to create components based off of that user case versus trying to make something fit into an insane multitude of users and molds across this very massive company. So I thought that worked really well. And I don't know if anyone else experiences design systems kind of breaking at a certain size, but I have multiple times. It's like it becomes insane chaos. So I don't know.
I did want to just mention, I think in this vein, and it's probably worth sharing here for anybody who's thinking about this, when I was at Config earlier this year, I went to Ford Motor Company, actually did a presentation about the multi-channel, multi-theme connected libraries that they put together for in Figma. And it's really interesting because they have to support, they've got multiple brands that they support, so the different car companies that they support, but then those things roll up into the various device platforms that they support. So they're supporting, iOS and Android, but also CarPlay. They're supporting web. So there's a lot of these very unique, even dashboards, like they're pulling in the actual dashboard of the car. So there's a lot of unique scenarios that they're trying to account for. I think Spotify has done something like this, and I think I saw Etsy present something similar to this. It's unique to the organization, but they create that kind of layered approach where it's like we at a high level we want to all agree on these particular decisions, these colors, these rounded corners, whatever those decisions are, and those kind of get handed down to the various teams, those that get pulled into the various libraries for the components for each of the devices, and then some of the brands get pulled in. So again, it might be overly complex for certain scenarios, but it is worth thinking about, and it might kind of tie into, I think, what you're talking about here, Christy.
And Adam, I want to give you a chance to jump in too and share a little bit about what you're posting here. But I'll just say another thing that I think to the idea that as your organization scales, things kind of break with a system is the larger the number of platforms you're trying to support. Sometimes I feel like actually the system itself should get smaller, right? Like, because what's the overlap of those things? The system needs to be supporting the things that are common, right? The common experiences. If there are unique experiences for a specific product or a specific platform, that platform team, that product team should own that, right? So it's the things that are common that the system needs to support. I think we get sometimes in this mental mode of like, design systems rule everything, and everything that's part of the experience should be in the system. And I just don't think that's true, right? That is a way that they will break very hard, very fast, because it's not maintainable, So I think that maybe is a little bit of a different perspective on it. But Adam, if you're willing to share a little bit about what you threw into the notes channel, I'll invite you to do so. But don't feel pressure.
I dropped that in there because we were kind of going down that rabbit hole of like, design token automation and also talking about size of teams. And so I work at an agency, so I kind of bounce around between different client design systems. So, I was on that early stages of that 4 design system. This graphic you're showing here is from last year. We were brought in for T-Mobile. And so, some of these companies, it's great because they do have the funding and the resources and the willingness to kind of move quickly, right? So this was T-Mobile in particular was like, how quickly can you build a multi-platform design system, right? And so that the structure and size of that team was built with that in mind, with speed in mind. So multi-platform, cross-disciplinary squads. But the design token automation here, this was kind of pre-Figma variables, so we were still using Token Studio. Just quickly talk through it. I mean, we don't have to get too in the weeds, but yeah, we did use web components because there was a lot of people still using Angular, but we also had to support AEM for the new .com. But then also they had a new flagship app launching. So it was iOS and Android. So, and then multi-brand, right? So T-Mobile and Metro, really the focus was on T-Mobile, but wanted to create a brand theme to support Metro, even though they weren't adopting it, at that time. So you can kind of just see the structure. This is just how we illustrated it so people can kind of understand what was happening, but using a custom version of Style Dictionary. And so again, large team, we had supported a single dev who was basically just full-time on updating the Style Dictionary scripts and managing those and stuff, right? Which was kind of necessary for us to move at that kind of pace. And then we were able to deliver two kind of themes along with the component libraries, which allowed the devs to not only use the components, but also use those themes to build from for their own experiences. So that was just kind of one illustration. And this is kind of best case scenario, I think, for us, usually just to be able to work with this size of team. It comes with its own challenges, obviously. But, being able to move in a really like agile, fast way, it was kind of fun. This is the first time we structured a team like this in these kind of little squads where you had platform devs from each platform working with the design team.
It kind of federated model a little bit, where you had reps from the various brands essentially coming in and doing some of that work?
So, I mean, it was a centralized team, right? So all of these are dedicated resources to the design system team. We just broke them out into little agile squads. So we kind of called it scaffolding, like the devs could start scaffolding while the designers were kind of going through the research and the strategy for the different components. And, that way it wasn't kind of like waterfall inside of sprints, right? They were actually like building while the designers were creating, and it worked well, right? As long as, the other thing too, it's like we had to move so fast that like we didn't have a backlog for dev either, right? So we had that problem. We stood this team up all at once, but then we couldn't wait for design to like get through building the first like 5 to 10 components. We needed to like have, work going and flowing from the start. So it was a unique challenge.
What else? So what other thoughts here? Anything from anybody post something here they want to call out for the folks to discuss, or?
I was hoping to sort of ping the audience about their experience or use of Style Dictionary and how that helps solve this topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, I saw quite a few folks mention Style Dictionary or some other form of token translation in their answers. That was probably the most common one, I think. Anybody, show of hands, who all's using something like that to sort of? Okay, I see one, two, couple folks. Okay, yeah. So it seems to be a pretty common one. Any gotchas that you've had in using that tool?
Oh, myself, yeah, all the gotchas.
All the gotchas.
Yeah.
I'm curious too. So I have looked and played around with, for example, I tried out Supernova and Zeroheight, and Supernova in particular, I liked has an export functionality where it's like they have a what do you call it? Like a storefront where you can essentially say, here's a Kotlin export for my tokens, and you can essentially build your own or use ones that other people have built. So that seems great. I think maybe pricing model might be harder for larger companies where it's like it's per seat or something. Yeah. And so that tends to be a little bit harder, I think, for some larger organizations to justify that.
I would jump in there. Yeah, I'll use Supernova quite a bit, right? So like we've used Style Dictionary in the past. The nice thing about having a tool like Supernova or like Specify is that the design team can start to export tokens without developer help, right? And so, recently on a design system we're working on, we use Supernova because it has a Flutter exporter. It's the only Flutter exporter that I know out there that the design team can actually just go set up the tokens and export directly to Flutter. And so that, because in this case, it was like the opposite end of that graphic that I showed, where it's literally like a 2-person design system team, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're handing off to devs. And so having that as a tool was super helpful. And Supernova did just add the ability to pull in Figma variables, which is also great, right? It's one less thing, because previously we were manually setting up every single token inside of Supernova. I know Specify does that too. So
there's pretty cool evolution happening in the tooling space right now. And Knapsack's another one. Luro, actually, so there's a weird connection, but Jesse's the music that Jesse chose was by a guy named Trent Walton, who originally worked for a company called Paravel. I think that still exists, but Paravel has started a new company called Luro, which is a design system tool that does some documentation stuff. I don't know that they're doing like token management yet, but they have some cool analytics stuff as well. So weird connections. But
does anybody really want Figma to start exporting tokens? Because they don't do that now. You have to use a plugin.
With the enterprise feature, there's a REST API that would allow publishing tokens. Something that we've wanted to look into, because in my dream world, having design owning tokens and allowing engineering to just consume them into like a Style Dictionary implementation would be, I think, an ideal way to kind of maintain the source of truth.
Uh-oh, he said source of truth. Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Oh, I arrived late.
The Zoom room shuts down.
Said the wrong thing.
No. We're just messing with you. Amy, what are you thinking there?
There's this fear I have where if designers have too much power, sometimes if it goes into the tokens and tokens get automatically shipped, it can bypass sort of a quality check, or it can bypass sort of like a consistency check. So I guess if you have very conscious systems designers who know exactly what they're doing, then yeah, you could connect them from Figma directly to like an engineering pipeline, like straight shot. But otherwise, in my last organization, we were exploring maybe a PR gets pulled. And so if you basically propose the tokens, and then it goes on to like a staging server, and then we can all say yes or no, whether or not it actually ships, or it can ship in the limited version on a particular branch.
Yeah.
We didn't get that far, but it was because multi-brand scenarios. Yeah,
there's a lot of risk there, right? Which is one of the reasons why we talk about systems moving a little bit slower, so that we can kind of have that protection, of that kind of thing happening. And especially when you start layering tokens, right? Now all of a sudden a change in one layer can have an impact across different layers, and it's almost sometimes hard to map all of that and test it. we are unfortunately, like, we flew through this time. I think we could have another hour easily here, but just want to say thank you to Jesse for co-hosting today and for sort of like really spearheading this as a topic for us, for all of your contributions. Thank you for answering, for jumping and giving it an hour of your time. That's it for this episode. Thanks again to our sponsors, zeroheight and Sparkbox, for making this episode possible. And thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to participate live in future episodes of The Question, visit bencallahan.com/thequestion. And as always, stay in learning mode.